Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. It is March 31st, 2023. MLB opening day was yesterday. Me and Dom are very excited about that. Both big baseball guys. Dom, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Like you said, very excited that baseball's finally back. We had our first games yesterday, so I'm pumped about it.
Absolutely. I know I was glued to my couch pretty much all day yesterday,
Yep.
from 10 a.m. over here on the West Coast all the way until the Angels and the A's wrapped up last night. I know you're an athletics fan, so you're probably pretty pumped up about getting the opening day win. And who knows, maybe that's the highlight of your season.
Hopefully. I mean, we beat Otani, so anytime we can do that, I'll take it.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got some MLB today. We've got some overreactions. We've got some news to break, and we got a little bit of March Madness that we'll get into a little later, as well as a little bit of NFL draft season talk. So we'll start with the bulk of our show today, which is that MLB stuff. Opening day was yesterday. It was a lot of fun, totally a good time. But right before opening day, the New York Mets got hit with some pretty bad news when they heard that Justin Verlander is going down with an injury. He strained his teres major, which is the muscle that connects the scapula and the shoulder. And it doesn't seem to be too big of an injury for the Mets and for Verlander. Uh, but it is one that will keep him out and we'll put him on the IL for a little bit. And I saw this news as a Mets fan, and I was just a little bit disappointed because it always seems to happen to us at the worst times. And Verlander was not expected to start opening day, but he was going to start today for the Mets on day two. And he was also going to start the home opener for New York. So pretty tough news, but hopefully Verlander won't be out for too long.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize you were a Mets fan, so that's extra tough. But I mean, that's the kind of risk they have. They have Scherzer and Verlander. They're kind of 1-2 punch, but they're obviously getting older. They've battled injuries before, so it's one of those things where they go to the Mets. It seems like it's going to happen. It's that little curse you guys have, but it's hopefully, like you said, it's not too big of a thing. I'm glad he's finally out of the AL because I dealt with him for years. But if you guys can get a strong Verlander and Scherzer and get at least 25 plus starts out of them both, then there's no reason why you guys shouldn't be able to repeat last year's performance, at least in the regular season.
Yeah, for sure. And, like you said, those guys are getting older and, they're going to become more injury prone if, the more you stick them out there. And Verlander's 40 years old now and Scherzer's 39. And neither of them really had too big of an injury past before the season. But Scherzer got injured twice last year. He had 2 IL stints. I think he made around 25 starts. So like we were saying, if he can make 25 starts, if Verlander can make 25 starts for the Mets, playing most of the season should get us back to that 100 plus win category. Luckily for the Mets, they have about 7 or 8 starting pitchers that they can go to, MLB caliber starting pitchers. So in reaction to this news, they called up Tyler McGill from AAA Syracuse, and he'll fill the shoes of Verlander. I don't believe he's starting today, but I think he's going to get the nod when Verlander was supposed to go. And it was the same thing with Jose Quintana. Jose Quintana went down in spring training. He went down with a lat injury, and he's expected to be out for a much longer term than Verlander. And the Mets reacted by keeping David Peterson on the team and slotting in Peterson to start in Quintana's role. So like I said, the Mets have a good commodity of starting pitchers. And they, looking back on it now, a lot of Mets fans called for Carlos Carrasco to be traded this offseason. But now we're pretty happy to have Cookie around.
Yeah, exactly. It's pitching depth matters. You need for exactly those reasons, especially when you have older guys. Someone's going to get hurt eventually down the line. So you gotta, especially not trading Carrasco, keeping Peterson, which I thought, because he did pretty good towards the end of last season. He had a couple stints where he looked really good and didn't seem like they were going to give him a shot anyways, but it's good for him to finally get this shot. But yeah, it's pitching depth matters. You got to have it. You got to have guys who can actually have experience in the big leagues, because you don't just want to roll out a bunch of rookies that have barely touched AAA. So it's important to have that kind of depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Mets with Peterson, Peterson was pretty strong down the stretch, like you were saying last year.
Yeah.
And McGill has a ton of experience in the big leagues. He wasn't as effective as he's been in the past, but he was playing through injury last season. So hopefully he gets back to form there. And Verlander going down is with the first segment of that we got today. So we're going to move on to a little bit of MLB overreactions, which are always fun after opening day. Everybody loves to jump to conclusions when there's 161 games remaining, especially if your team wins or loses. And do you think the Angels are in trouble?
I do. I think they say every year it's going to be different, but I don't think it is. It's going to be another year where, they have the talent and they did bolster their lineup with guys like Hunter Renfroe. But it's just, we saw the bullpen last night. They couldn't even hold, I mean, granted, there was a 1-run lead, but they couldn't even hold that. And the offense couldn't even score more than 1 run. So it's going to be another year of they have the talent, but they're going to win like 75, 80 games and then just miss the playoffs again.
If you think they get off to really, a bad start, 75, 80 wins, that can come in a lot of different ways. You could start out strong and then start losing a bunch of games down the stretch, or you could start out really poorly and then kind of, fiddle your way along for the rest of the year and get to 75 wins. Do you think if they are really bad at the beginning and, this is going nowhere, do you think that they pull the trigger on an Ohtani trade?
I think they almost kind of have to. I mean, especially if you're that bad by the All-Star break around the trade deadline, I really don't think he's going to want to stay there. I mean, I know seems like he loves LA, but I just don't think financially wise and everything else, I think you kind of have to take that risk of he might not come back and we could really, because that's the thing the Angels don't really have. They don't really have a farm at all. So you trade Ohtani, you can completely refurbish that farm system. So if they were smart, I think they would.
And Ohtani wants to compete. I mean, you think he wants to sit on another 75 win team while people are going to winning World Series and playing playoff games? I mean, it's something he doesn't want to do. Certainly, we can say that.
Exactly.
And like you said, the Angels don't have a farm at all. So if we could be gearing up to see potentially if the Angels aren't great this year, if they don't play well during, around the trade deadline, around that time, we could potentially see the biggest trade in MLB history. A team is going to give an absurd amount for Shohei Ohtani, even a rental. And not even for the sense of just giving up all that money or giving up all the prospects, all the capital and the prospects, but getting a head start on the Ohtani contract talks, because that's really the bulk of it, right? You want to get Ohtani, in a place where he's comfortable, and you want to say, hey, let's make a deal right now before you can hit the open market and before other teams can have a shot at you. And the first team that jumps into my mind with that is the Dodgers. Just because I think that they really will be chasing Ohtani hard because, he's an LA guy. He's comfortable there already. But he'd be going to a much more respected culture and a much more respected team in the Dodgers, a team that can actually grow and compete for a World Series every season. And, a team that since 2020 has been a Shohei Ohtani away from being world champions. Again, even though the Dodgers won 111 games last season, they still came up short in the playoffs. So I do think the Angels are in trouble. I think the Angels have been in trouble for a little while. They made a couple of nice moves, and everyone was praising them this offseason for getting Brandon Drury and Tyler Anderson. And those guys are good pieces, don't get me wrong. But those type of pieces are pieces that a team adds that already was really good. And then it's going to go try and chase a championship this year instead of, being a first-round exit. That's not what the Angels were last season. They weren't a good team. They weren't very strong. And then they go out and get these pieces that are like, they're kind of like building pieces for the future. But, hey, the future's right now. So I wish that they had bought in a little bit more this offseason. I wish that they had chased Carlos Correa a little bit more. Or maybe had gone after like a Verlander, try to go get a starting pitcher. And it's so tough because they're already paying Anthony Rendon. But at this point, you're sitting here, well, and obviously Mike Trout as well, but Rendon more because Rendon's not really doing much. You're sitting here, if you're an Angels fan, you're an Angels employee, and you're saying, hey, we might have the worst situation in the league right now. Let's get rid of Ohtani. Let's start over. It's going to be painful to trade him, but getting that kind of package back will make it worth it.
Well, and that's the thing that the Angels have never, like, they've just been refusing to do, because I honestly thought they should have traded Mike Trout a long time ago, because it was clear they weren't going to build a team around him, and that's what's sad. They clearly spend money. They go out and they pay Rendon, they pay Trout. They have the money to get guys like that to actually build a team around, but the problem is they'll just pay one or two big name guys later in their career, like they did that with Pujols, and then it never works out. So I know they can't really trade Trout, but Ohtani, 100%, especially if you're not anywhere close to contention to where you think you can really push it over the next couple months after the deadline, and then you have to trade them, because they don't really have a farm system to be buyers at the deadline either. So they're kind of in that, they're stuck. So it's
That's a good point.
Either way, even if they're contending, I feel like you kind of got to just go for it.
I think they're stuck. That's a good way to put it. And another overreaction I had about yesterday was I was watching that Orioles Red Sox game a little bit. And the Orioles, the Red Sox, they fought back and forth that whole game. I think the Orioles were winning like 10-5 or something. And then Boston came back and made it a really close game there in the ninth. Ended up winning. Baltimore ended up winning 10-9. And my takeaway from that game is that Adley Rutschman might seriously be the American League MVP this season. He is really, really good at baseball. He was 5 for 5 yesterday. I think he had 3 RBIs. And every time he goes up there, he's just got a different approach, or he's got the same approach, and he's attacking the pitcher that's on the mound, and he's really playing offense with the pitcher. You don't see him swing at bad pitches. You don't see him over swinging. He just stays compact. He stays with the ball, and he could really seriously, I think, win MVP this season.
Yeah, I mean, he also debuted last year, and you saw that flash of him. And he's going to be that cornerstone of that Orioles team. They're getting younger. They're actually making a push of, we can actually be a playoff team for a while now. And yeah, I was watching a little bit of that game too, and I remember I saw the home run that he hit, and he's going off. And I would say that that's a pretty good argument to say he's going to win MVP. I think his defense honestly could be good enough too. He could add a couple Gold Gloves to his collection, but I definitely think Boston's it's going to be a flip. We're not going to be seeing, Boston and New York. New York will still be up there, but the Orioles, they're going to be more in that second place, third place seed in the AL East.
Yeah, absolutely. And the AL East is cutthroat. It really is. And I did a ton of predictions this year and biggest strengths. And I've been on the division previews this whole year, this whole offseason. And what I've analyzed from the AL East is that it's going to be really, really, really good. And it's going to be hard to win games every single day. Even Boston, a team like Boston who could finish in last place, probably will finish in last place, is they've got a good offense. And their team's hard to beat day in and day out. But then you get to the Orioles, and the Rays are always a really good team, and they're always going to have a really good roster. And the Blue Jays offense is one of the best in the MLB. And then you've got the Yankees there that are still really, really solid, have a really good rotation and a solid bullpen, and overall solid team. Aaron Judge is in that division. George Springer, Bo Bichette, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson might be something. So you got a lot of flash in that division. And I've gone back and forth on what is the best division in the sport. And I would say it's probably the American League East right now. I would say the two Easts are probably tied, the American League
Yeah,
and the National League East, for being the best division in the sport. What do you think about that?
yeah, because the AL East, it's one of those divisions where whoever the last place team is, if you were to put that team in other divisions, they'd be a playoff team. That's probably going to be one of those cases. Like even like you said, Boston, they have that good offense, so they could still pull off 70-ish wins. Same thing with say the Orioles still they finished in fourth place, but they still have a good 80 or so wins. You put them in half these other divisions in baseball, they're a playoff team. They might even be the division winner. So that's I would say the NL East is it's strong, but I would say the AL East is probably the best right now, just because you see all those five teams. There's a chance for them to all make the playoffs, even Boston, even though they're kind of more in the downhill.
Yeah, and there's definitely a chance for all five of them to make the playoffs, and I don't think that we
Yeah,
can say that about any other division as it
yeah,
stands currently. So moving on to our next point, which is still some MLB overreactions. I wanted to throw in one more overreaction, which is that the Brewers just have no offense. They can have the best pitching in the world, and Corbin Burns wasn't great yesterday, but they can have the best pitching in the world. They can have the best bullpen in the world, and they just have no offense. And if that's how it's going to be, and if Christian Yelich is, not the guy that we saw in 2018, but more the guy that we saw since 2021, the Brewers are in trouble because they didn't add too much this offseason. They got Jesse Winker from Seattle. That was really the biggest bat that they brought in. I mean, they changed a couple positions, they filled a couple holes, but that lineup's just not very good.
yeah. And honestly, that was going to be one of my overreactions too. Was the Brewers they're kind of lost. I mean, they just barely missed the playoffs last year, and you go into the offseason and the mindset should be, we just missed it. That NL Central division, it's not crazy. So we had a couple really good pieces in that market, and then we're back into it. But they just, like you said, Jesse Winker was like their biggest guy, and they were just kind of hoping that Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff and all them were going to carry them. And obviously, Burns got kind of knocked around yesterday, so you show that even if you have all these aces on your team, you need someone to score a run for them, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah, and that goes for Woodruff as well. If you have no offense, it's not gonna really matter at all if you have really good pitching, which they've shown the last couple of years. And another team that's shown that kind of recently has been the Miami Marlins. I almost said the Miami Dolphins. We're not talking about football. Miami Marlins. The last couple of seasons, they have had elite starting pitching, but the lineup hasn't been there to back it up. So that's really what I see with the Brewers. They should trade Corbin Burns. That's what I think.
Yeah,
He clearly did not have fun this offseason with the arbitration stuff, and he doesn't like to be
yep,
in
exactly
Milwaukee.
right. Mm-hmm.
And if anybody that doesn't know, Corbin Burns went through a messy arbitration dispute with the Milwaukee Brewers over $700,000, which, guys, we're picking hairs over $700,000. And it was really messy. Corbin lost the case for arbitration. The Brewers basically, in that arbitration case, said, you were the reason why we didn't make the playoffs last year. You were bad last year down the stretch, which he wasn't great down the stretch, but he's still Corbin Burns. He's still your best pitcher, and you can't go out and publicly embarrass him like that because he said he felt embarrassed. So when you're at that point that the Brewers are right now, I think you have to move on probably, and you have to probably trade him, see what you can get for him. A lot of these teams in MLB now, they're too fixated on sticking around in the middle, and they're not either buying or selling, which is something we see in a lot of sports with teams that are just fiddling around in the middle. But it's really starting to become a trend now in like the NBA, for example. Like teams, they sell off all of their weight and everything that makes them solid now, and then they just grow for the future and try and get better. So I think that's the direction that both the Angels and the Brewers should try and go in. The Brewers are just, yeah, they're not. They could have slipped into the wild card last year and then got eliminated in the first round because that's what was going to happen to them. So
And the thing with the Brewers is just like they have at least they have a bit more prospect depth than the Angels do. So they have like they have a good outfield depth prospect wise. They actually have some top guys where once they get called up, you can kind of build around them, but it's not enough. And like you said, you disrespect your best player. He doesn't want to be there anymore. You're just stuck in the middle. So trade Corbin. You can get a good probably 3 to 5 top prospects for him. Just kind of rebuild. You're going to have to take that Yelich salary. There's nothing you can really do about that. But besides that, you kind of cut down the roster salary wise, and just kind of it's one of those teams where they think they can still make it, and they're delusional. But if they actually want to have a future, they need to rebuild.
Yeah, and that comes from ownership a lot of the times too.
Yeah.
Because ownership will really, behind closed doors, like they'll manipulate things more than we even know. And they'll say, hey, you are not trading Corbin Burns under any circumstances. So that can totally happen with sports teams a lot of the times that we don't really think about. And moving on from the Brewers, I don't want to talk about the Brewers anymore because I don't like them. We're going to a little bit of Jacob deGrom. He got roughed up yesterday by the Phillies. Phillies are a really good lineup. Let me pull up his stat line really quickly. deGrom, he was not very good yesterday at all, like I just said.
Both him and Nola got knocked around.
Yeah, both of them did. deGrom only went 3 2/3 innings, giving up 6 hits, 5 earned. He also gave up a home run. And he struck out 7, which that's more of old deGrom. But giving up 5 runs on 6 hits to Phillies. Phillies are really good. deGrom, usually we know him for being a little better than he was yesterday.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I do think he's gonna beat the injury allegations a little bit, but I just think that the Rangers are one of those teams where same thing, like they think they could, and they're on the right track to becoming a contender, but I don't think they're there yet. And I think because of that, they're going to rely a little too much on him. And like we saw yesterday, he just got knocked around. And granted, the Phillies are a very good team, but he is familiar with them. He was in NL forever, and now he's going to an AL where behind him, I mean the Rangers rotation isn't bad, but once you get to that bullpen, it's a little janky. So I think they're going to rely on him a little bit too much, and then I think that's what's going to lead to some kind of injury or just wear out, something like that.
Yeah, and the Rangers are one of the teams where they at least I can applaud them for going in. Right? Like they're trying. They invested in that starting pitching with deGrom and with Nathan Eovaldi, and I believe they got Andrew Heaney as well. You can respect them for going in and trying to buy and improving. But like you said, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. So if they put deGrom out there and they push him too hard every 5th day, and he starts 35 times before the playoffs even start, then you got to question if he gets worn out. You would think that the Rangers are probably not going to push him given his injury history. So that's just something I think we're going to have to wait and see on. I don't think that deGrom is just going to be, he's going to be like he's going to go to the AL and not be the same pitcher, throw up like a 4 ERA. I just don't think that's going to happen. But he can very well take a step back. And he kind of did take a step back when he got back from his injury last year with the Mets. He wasn't that guy that was striking out 12 and not giving up runs and allowing 2 hits a game. He kind of struggled a little bit, and he got knocked around in a couple of starts. The Mets had a start late in the season against the Athletics in Oakland, and it was a game where we were, I think, 2 games up on Atlanta, and Atlanta had won earlier that day. And we're playing the Athletics, and we're like, okay, we got DeGrom. Let's just win, move on, and we'll go
Yeah, it
back.
should have been an easy thing, but
DeGrom got shelled that game. He gave up, I think,
yep.
7 runs to Oakland. And that day,
Hmm.
I remember being like, oh my goodness, this isn't the same Jacob DeGrom. He just sold
Yeah.
us this game. He just sold us this game while we needed that so badly for the division. And are like, are we even going to re-sign him? And then obviously we end up not re-signing him. And
Yep.
that was really kind of the point where I was like, hey, man, maybe he's not the same pitcher anymore. Maybe the injury history has gotten to him. But this is, like I said, something we're just going to have to wait and see. We can't make a definitive answer on this right now. Let him get at least 10 starts before we can say anything, at least 5-10 starts. I'm not worried about DeGrom just yet. And a cool clip I saw from yesterday, moving forward a little bit, was Steve Cohen. He was out with the Mets 7-line army yesterday, and he was hanging out with fans in the stands. He was accompanied by his security guard next to him, but he was within the Mets 7-line army, which is a big fan base that the Mets have. If you're ever watching a Mets game and you see a bunch of fans wearing orange shirts that are all grouped in one section or
Okay. Yeah.
one theme, it's the 7-line army. It's been a thing in Queens for about, I would say, 7-8 years now, ever since that World Series run that we went on. And yeah, Steve Cohen goes into the 7-line army. He hangs out with people. He's talking with people. He's taking pictures. And as a Mets fan, I just look at that and I'm so happy to see that. He really does care about this fan base. He cares about the organization. And a guy with that much money and an owner of a baseball team, you don't really see him being, or you don't really see owners ever really do that. So I thought it was a really cool thing that Cohen went and did that.
Yeah, that's what baseball needs. That's how owners should be. I mean, obviously, I can say being a fan of a team where the owner doesn't give a shit about anything. I get jealous when I see Cohen. You know, he's a guy who he's not only a fan, but he wants, he's a fan, so he wants to win, and he obviously has the money to do that. That's why they introduced the whole Cohen tax and everything, and a lot of owners kind of got upset at him, but that's the kind of thing baseball needs. He's still a fan. Hang out like you said in the stands, be more personable, but when he's up there in the front office and everything, he wants to get shit done. You know, if I have to throw, a bunch of money at guys, so be it. That's what's going to help us win the championship. So that's seeing that kind of stuff. That's what baseball needs. That's what owners need to do, because a lot of owners aren't like that. And a lot of owners, they don't even really have any interest in the team. It's just more an investment for them. So they, just kind of slash payroll, go about it, whatever. But guys like Cohen, I get jealous when I see him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is what baseball needs. And, owners getting mad at Steve Cohen for spending a lot of money is really something that's like, it tells you about the state
Yeah,
of the
it's their
game a
fault.
little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it tells you about the state of the game a little bit, at least. You would like to see people going out and spending money. And when someone does, you can't really get mad at them. I mean, I get the Steve Cohen tax, the threshold of, spending that much money. I agree that there should be some sort of docking, especially because there's no salary cap in baseball. Yeah, I just think that him going and hanging out with the fans is a really cool touch. And he knows, I think, what Mets fans want so badly, because he is a Mets fan. And he's been a Mets fan his entire life. And he's just an extremely rich Mets fan who decided to buy the team and really make it a fan-first driven experience. The Mets added a speakeasy in right field this year at Citi Field. So I mean, it's cool. It's a lot of fun to see where this is going, and the product on the field isn't always the most indicative thing. I mean, the Mets won 101 games last year. Obviously, we're going in, but you see things like the owner hanging out with the fans, and that the culture is different with the Mets. So hopefully they can break through for my sake a little bit. And I just wanted to discuss one thing that happened on opening day that you think will continue for the rest of the season. And I wanted to jump on this one first, and I'm going to go with the Red Sox poor starting pitching. You trot out Corey Kluber on opening day. old man Corey Kluber now, and he gets knocked around. He wasn't very good all day long. So it was very tough to see Kluber not pitch well. But I just don't think that they have a very good pitching staff at all. And that starting pitching especially really, really concerns me. And I think that it's going to be a trend that continues for the rest of the season for Boston. And I think it's going to be eventually their downfall in this division. That was the reason they weren't good last year, and it's the reason they won't be good this year.
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, they have that good offense, and it's only going to get better with the young guys they have, especially once like Tristan Casas. Once he breaks out, he's going to be a really good first baseman. But it's one of those things where they could score as many runs as they want, but they just don't have that pitching anymore, and it's a mix of older guys like Kluber, and it's just they don't really that pitching isn't much of a direction. And like we said, they're probably going to be the last place team in the AL East because they just don't have that strong pitching anywhere.
Yeah, and it's not like we've got a great bullpen either for Boston. We've got Kenley Jansen, that was a nice pickup, and he's a pretty good pitcher, and he's solid at what he does. But you got to get to Kenley, and to get to Kenley, you've got to have a lead, right? So, and that means that the other team doesn't score runs. So it's going to be hard for Boston. I actually think Boston has a top 15 offense, maybe top 20, but top 15 offense. Masataka Yoshida, really good. Tristan Casas is really good. Rafael Devers is a superstar, maybe a Hall of Famer one day. They've got a good offense, lackluster pitching, and that's what really scares me about Boston. And what's one thing that you think is going to continue that happened on opening day?
I mean, I don't want to touch too much on it, but like we said earlier, the whole Angels thing, not getting enough run support for Ohtani and just not coming together as a full team. But besides that, I would say Cleveland, I think, because they lost yesterday to Seattle, and they got hit around a little bit. But I just think, especially with Tristan McKenzie going down to injury, and I just think they're going to be a team where, like we saw last year, they're a very young team and they made a good run in the postseason. But I think this year that's going to bite them a little bit, and I think that they're going to go on that trend of they're not going to be good late in the games, and that's going to lead to they're going to regress, I think.
That's interesting, yeah, and they're the anti-Boston, right? They've got some good pitching. They've got really good depth, but it just matters. Hey, can this lineup be good enough? And night in and night out, I don't know if I'm taking this lineup really to the grave with me. I like some guys, Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez, and a couple other guys. They've got a good team and they've got a good lineup. Josh Bell's there now. But I don't know if that pitching can, or I don't know if that lineup can consistently be there. Like we saw last night, they were 0-0 with Seattle the whole game. I think Bieber started. I'm sure Bieber started. I didn't watch much of that game, but Bieber started, I'm sure, and he was good down the stretch. And then Ty France breaks the game with a 3-run home run.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here thinking, are the Guardians going to have the bats to do it this year? And that's really one thing that scares me about them. They got all the way, like we said, with that run. So you think that they're going to regress. If they do end up regressing a good amount, then that division is up for grabs like none other division.
Oh yeah.
And I saw a pretty nice performance from the South Side, from the Chi Sox yesterday. I was pretty happy to see the White Sox take the win over Houston. And so if not the Guardians, then who?
I mean, like you said, the White Sox, they're one of those teams where if they can stay healthy, then they can do a pretty good run. Because like their outfield, Luis Robert and Hilo Jimenez, they have the talent to be, 30-plus home run hitters, win them a lot of games, but it's whether or not they're going to stay healthy. So I think it's if they can stay healthy, then they'll run away with that division, especially if Cleveland does regress. And then I can see the Twins are a little shaky, but they did add a little bit. Obviously, they brought back Correa. I know they got Pablo Lopez. So I think they're one of those kind of sneaky teams where they get hot at the right moment. Then I could definitely see them going for a run for it. But I don't think Cleveland, I think, could still make it into the postseason. They'll be a wild card, but I don't think that division's theirs anymore.
So you think there's two AL Central wild playoff teams?
I could see it. I could see, like I said, Minnesota, if they get hot, they get a little streaky at the right time, they could, but I think they're not quite there yet. But I could definitely see Chicago winning that division and then Cleveland falling to that wild card spot.
I can see it as well, especially with that third wild card spot being added.
Yep.
Not this past offseason, but the last offseason. That third wild card was added. Ended up biting the Mets in the ass a little bit because we had to play the Padres and we lost to them in the playoffs. But
yeah,
as far as the AL Central, I agree with you. I think that any three of those teams can actually win it. That division is very much up for grabs. But I would really like to see Chicago win it because I think they probably have the best roster in the division. Could be a hot take, whatever. But I think that they have up and down the lineup, and the pitching staff is really solid. Bullpen is really good once they get Liam Hendricks back. By the way, they're saying that Liam Hendricks might be back in June.
I saw that. Yeah,
he has
surprising.
He has not Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was diagnosed with cancer, right before the season started. So to hear that he might be back that soon, I was surprised by that. But obviously, if he's able to get back, that's an incredible feat for Hendricks to get back that soon. But obviously, we can't really take too much of this. We can't really talk about this too much because it's such a gray area with Hendricks.
Right.
We have no idea what's going to happen. But as far as the rest of the White Sox team, they've got a really solid lineup. It's led by Tim Anderson and Eloy Jimenez, and losing Jose Abreu sucks. But if you can potentially go out there and add at the deadline, maybe trade one of your prospect pieces. And I'm not sure about the state of their farm, but if you're in first place or second place and you're close and you're right there and you're Chicago and you're right there, you have to go do something at the deadline because you're not. This roster is not strong enough right now to go out and win the AL Central, I think. But I think that if they're competitive, they need to buy in, and they really need to get a bunch of buy-in. And I really liked how they I like Pedro Grifol a lot, their new manager. I thought that was a very solid hire in comparison. It seems like they learned from Tony La Russa. They weren't going to hire somebody that was, essentially just like he should have never gotten hired there in a million years. In a million centuries, he should have never gotten hired there. But yeah, I like Grifol a lot. The Twins scare me a little bit because they're not very good as far as the bullpen or starting pitching.
Right.
And the Guardians lineup scares me a little bit. So the team that I'm least nervous about right now might be the White Sox.
Yeah, because and like you said, they're all around. They just have that good lineup, and they're young. So it's especially getting rid of a guy like La Russa, who's just way too old school for that young of a team. You see them. That culture is much more. It's just much more uplifting. Especially like even though you said first baseman, they lost Jose Abreu, so you might have to go out and get one. But I know they got Gavin Sheets and Andrew Vaughn, and those are two young, really good guys who, you stick them out there and they start having a breakout, and then all of a sudden you're much more ahead than you even thought. So that's why I think, like I said before, Cleveland, they're young, but I feel like they might be just a little too inconsistent. And I think, like you said, the White Sox, they're an all-around team, and as long as they can stay healthy, especially the outfield, then they'll run their way with that division, I think.
Yeah, and Vaughn, like we said, we were talking about Andrew Vaughn a little bit. Vaughn was the guy yesterday that had a nice he knocked in the go-ahead run, that the 2-run double into the gap that the White Sox would not relinquish later in the game. So it's interesting for sure. I think the AL Central is going to grab my attention a whole lot. And one more, I just wanted to touch on one more team in MLB before we move on to a little bit of March Madness. The Chicago Cubs yesterday played pretty well. And we're sitting there, and they knocked up Corbin Burns over there in the first couple of innings, and they played really solidly, and they pitched well, especially they shut out the Brewers. So, is there any chance that the Cubs can sneak around? I know the National League is pretty tough with the NL West and the NL East being as really good as they are and top heavy. But is there any chance that the Cubs can sneak around, maybe slip into the playoffs this year?
I think if they can, kind of be in that middle pack around the deadline, and they can, they say, hey, let's go for it. I think they can. With Dansby Swanson and Cody Bellinger, it's one of those things where if you can get their prime out of them, then you'll be golden, especially Bellinger, because he's, it's the same thing with Yelich, ever since that MVP year, he's just kind of been downhill. But I think they're one of those teams where they're not bottom feeders. They have a good amount of talent, but they're not obviously World Series contenders. So it's one of those where it just depends if they get hot at the right time. They're actually clicking, their rotation can stay intact. But I think if they could be in a comfortable third place spot by the deadline, I think, and maybe make a push for it.
One thing that I do know about the Cubs is that they have a really solid culture, and that people seem to gravitate toward the Cubs a lot. Because of their stadium, Wrigley's, and the culture around there in Chicago and baseball in the summer. They've got that that really old school home feeling to them. And the Cubs, they're a ton of fun to watch, and I hope that they can get it done. Like you said, with the two players, Swanson and Bellinger, they can get their prime out of those two. I was also thinking maybe if they can get the prime out of their other two guys that they signed that were older this offseason, which is Eric Hosmer and Trey Mancini. So if they can get the prime out of those two dudes as well, then maybe they can be something pretty special this year. It would be pretty cool to see them be good again. I think Wrigley is always awesome, especially when the Cubs are good, and the Cubs are, every single game is almost sold out regardless, even when the Cubs were going through those lean years after the World Series. So if they can get it done, that'd be pretty cool. So we're going to shift focus a little bit here. We've been talking about I'm talking about Major League Baseball for this entire podcast so far. So we're going to switch it over a little bit to the big Final Four this weekend. A weird Final Four.
Very weird.
San Diego State, Miami. San Diego State is playing against they're playing against UConn, right?
F8.
No.
San Diego State's playing FAU, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, San Diego State's playing FAU, and UConn is playing Miami tomorrow. So exciting stuff. It's the Final Four. No higher than a 4 seed in this Final Four, which is unreal to think about. We've got FAU, who's a mid-major, essentially 9 seed, and San Diego State. Both those teams not Power 5. Then you got UConn and Miami, which is more of a less surprising matchup, but still very surprising.
Yeah, and it's one of the weirdest Final Fours I think we've seen, and it's like you said. I mean, UConn and Miami, they're a little bit more. You're like, okay, that it makes a little bit much more sense. But I mean, I don't even think I've heard of FAU, if I'm going to be honest, before the tournament. And then seeing them starting to win the first game and going on, I was like, damn. So they're one of those teams where, I mean, every March Madness has a Cinderella, or at least a couple, but this year it's multiple, and I mean, it's pretty much the entire Final Four is Cinderella teams. So but it's interesting to see, and it's good to see new teams, because it can get a little repetitive when you're constantly seeing, the Dukes and the, North Carolinas and just the teams repeating over and over.
No blue bloods this year. I think we could say that pretty confidently.
Yeah.
The blue bloods of college basketball, the UCLAs, Kentucky's, Villanovas, UNC's, Dukes.
Yep.
So we talked about that, and that's That's pretty crazy to think about. But this with the NIL stuff and with the transfer portal in college sports now, we're going to see a ton more parity, and that goes for every college sport. Especially, we saw TCU make the national championship this past year in college football, and we saw, obviously now this Final Four in basketball. This sport it's really good for the sport. The transfer portal and NIL, there's going to be a ton of parity here. San Diego State, who knew that they would have one of the best defenses in college basketball this year. University of Miami, they've got a ton of NIL money, and they've been throwing it around. And they probably have 2, maybe 3 NBA players on their roster as it stands right now. So all 4 of these teams were teams that were sneaky good, but became excellent in this tournament and really outlasted everybody else. And if you had to pick day before the Final Four weekend, and then obviously our national championship is on Monday, what do you think's taking it?
I gotta say, between the 2 games, I think UConn will beat Miami and San Diego State will beat FAU. But when it comes down to it, I think UConn, I think they'll end up taking it. They've been one of those teams where, they started really hot, towards the end of the regular season, they kind of got, they're a little streaky, kind of struggled a little bit, but they kind of picked it back up. And I think just, experience-wise, they're, between the 4 teams, they're one of those, they're, like we said, they're less Cinderella-y. So I would say I'd have them taking it all.
Yeah, absolutely. They're less Cinderella-y. That's a really good point. Amongst the 4 teams remaining, I think easily the best is FAU. When you look at their roster up and down, they've got a lot of really, really good basketball players. But I'm not ready to discount Florida Atlantic yet. I know SDSU has a really good defense, and they can score really well with their front court. And their guards are pretty good as well. But FAU uses the same 9 guys every single basketball game. The same guys get the same amount of minutes every game, and it's unreal what they're able to do. They're incredible at knocking down shots. They're one of the better 3-point teams. They take advantage of every opportunity from the free throw line, and they play solid enough defense to win the game. So I really like FAU against SDSU. I think that FAU wins this game, and I think they're going to knock down shots like they've been doing all year. And I think everyone's going to be shocked that the Florida Atlantic Owls are in the national championship in college basketball. Like, yes, this is real life. Florida Atlantic has made the national championship. I think it's going to be shocking for everyone, but I think it's going to be cool as well to see them in there. And I think their run is going to end at the hands of the UConn Huskies. UConn's really good. Sonogo, their big man, he could be one of the better. He could be an NBA player easily. He's probably one of the better college basketball players. I would say he's probably the player of the tournament right now as it stands. Maybe the Kansas State guard Noel, though. He had a pretty amazing tournament as well. So UConn's really well coached. Dan Hurley is really getting a chance now. And I like Dan Hurley because his brother Bobby is the coach at Arizona State, and that's where I go to school. Cool. I like Hurley, and I like UConn to go ahead and win the national championship. I think they have the best roster. I think they're the most well coached, and I think they're probably the best team.
Yeah, and like we said, I'm going to be really tuned into that San Diego State and that FAU game because, like you said, San Diego State has that really good defense, but I know FAU, their rebounding has been crazy because I think, and that's kind of been one of their little X factors is I think they've been out rebounding almost every team they've played this tournament so far. And like you said, like they're running out the same guys over and over, but yet it's just that little sneaky team where they're overpowering people. So it's one of those things, not overpowering, but they're finding ways to just sneak in and score points. So I think that one, UConn, I think it'll be a little less, it won't be as close, but the UConn and Miami, but the FAU and San Diego State, I think that'll be the best game between the 2.
Yeah, and Michigan State head coach Tom Izzo, he had a really interesting point about why some teams are really successful during March Madness and why it ends up working. And he says if you have a team that can rebound really well, grab offensive and defensive rebounds, and shoot the three-pointer, then you're going to have a successful basketball team in this tournament. Because
Yep.
when a team's able to get rebounds and they're able to make threes, that's obviously a completely different. It's a game changer, and that's exactly I think what we've seen from FAU so far this tournament.
Yeah, like I said, because I know they out rebounded Kansas State when they played them. Pretty sure they did it to Tennessee too. So it's just one of those things where, and I don't even think they're not basketball wise. They're not they're not crazy in height. I know they do have their center. I know is a pretty big guy, but besides that, it's you wouldn't think that team would be out rebounding all these top tier teams, but as I said, they're able to get that. They're able to get their shots off. So I think they're gonna throw a big fit to San Diego State, especially that defense. They're not gonna know what hit them.
That is going to be an exciting game for sure. So
Yep.
moving on from our March Madness stuff, we are going to wrap up the show today with a little bit of NFL draft talk. Got to get football in there. Football is the king as it stands. So
Yep.
we got to talk about it a little bit. There is a 24/7 NFL cycle these days. So Anthony Richardson, his stock is continuing to climb. At their pro day yesterday, I want to take a look at what was said there by an anonymous NFL staffer said that Anthony Richardson's arm talent and his dual threat ability is the best that they've seen, and that he draws comparisons to Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Fields. So that's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive to say the least. Richardson has been a solid guy, this whole time, but his stock has blown up in these last couple of weeks and this whole month. So there's a outside chance he goes number one overall. I don't think it happens though, personally.
I think honestly, I would say I feel like he would. I feel like the Panthers they're gonna want to take that risk and they're gonna go for it. But like we said, because I remember last year towards the end of the season, Richardson it was always Stroud and Young. It was Richardson was never in this conversation. He was a guy who you could probably get in like the second round and you'd be good. But like we said, his stock has just blown up, and seeing that pro day, because seeing the videos, he did look really good. Even at the combine, he's solid. He's a big project. I mean, everyone says that, but you can turn him into someone like Josh Allen or a Jalen Hurts, then he would be worthy of a first round pick. But I think it's also hard because Richardson's a guy, if you're a team, you want to draft him if you have a veteran quarterback right now, because I don't think he's ready to start week one of his rookie season. I think he'll need to sit for about a year or so. So that's why it's kind of hard with the Panthers, but I guess we'd see.
If he falls to number 7, I think the Raiders are a really good fit because they have Jimmy Garoppolo. They have Jimmy Garoppolo. They're paying him a lot of money to be there for a couple of years. And, Richardson could sit and he could analyze Jimmy's play and he could get in that offense for a little while. And if McDaniel stays there for a couple seasons, he can really mold himself. So I think if he's available at 7, that the Raiders should pull the trigger. They've got other roster holes, obviously, but they can get their future. I think if they end up with Richardson right now. So yeah, I think he's going to be a pretty good player once he gets to the NFL.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that because I'm a Raider fan, so I'm like,
yeah,
that's the only reason why I'm okay with Garoppolo right now. I say, you have Garoppolo. If you get someone like Richardson, then fine. Have Garoppolo go out there for a season or so. Richardson learns under him and McDaniels, and you throw him out there, not this upcoming season, but the season after, and you actually turn him into something, then we finally have our franchise quarterback that we haven't had in a long time, because Derek Carr has obviously been, he hasn't been enough. So you just need that. We need that new direction, that young guy who can actually go somewhere.
So you're an Oakland guy. Are you
Yeah,
are you excited to become a Las Vegas fan because the Raiders moved and now the A's are likely on their way out as well?
I'm hoping that, and it's funny because people will look at me because I live in Reno, so people will look at me weird when I say, "Oh, I don't want the A's to move."
Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice to have both of my teams in my home state, especially down there because I know the market would be nice. But I mean, you see the Raiders. You saw the Raider games last year. They had no fan base. It's like they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's all red. And it's one of those things where I think Vegas is better for expansion teams like the Golden Knights, where you can actually build your own culture there. But for existing teams, I don't think it's built for them as we see with the Raiders. But if they do want to move to Vegas, I won't be too mad. But I would prefer to see them stay in Oakland.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, moving back to the NFL draft a
Right.
little bit. The Raiders, I could see them taking Richardson as well, but I could also see them going O-line. They could go defense. Um, but I did just want to ask you, do you think CJ Stroud is a lock to go number one overall in this draft? Or do you think it could still be a guy like Richardson? Could it still be a guy like Bryce Young or even Will Levis?
I don't think you can. There's really one QB prospect that you can say is a lock in this moment. Because especially those first 7 picks, you have about 5 teams that need a quarterback, or that could potentially go after a quarterback. So it's one of those things where, and for all we know, the Panthers could for some reason trade down on draft day, and then another team comes up. So it's all going to depend on who has that number one pick, and what their need is. I think at the moment, for where it stands with the Panthers, um, I could see Richardson, or I could see Stroud over Richardson, even though I think the Panthers might be a little more higher on Richardson. But um, I wouldn't say he's a definite lock, and I wouldn't say any of them are a definite lock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think that Stroud is more likely than anyone else to go number one, but I
Yeah,
can't say that anyone's a lock right now, especially because of the way that things change in the NFL. On draft day, especially. A team could jump up and trade with the Panthers, and the Panthers won't have the number one pick, although I think that's unlikely.
yep,
I think that the Panthers should take a quarterback number one. I think that there's a chance that they don't. I think there's actually a chance that they trade back. But if I were a betting man, I would say CJ Stroud goes number one. It seems like the Panthers have liked him for the most amount of time. And it seems like that Bryce Young, there are concerns about his height. He's 5'10 and 3/4, which is the same height as Kyler Murray. So you never really know with a guy like Young. And Will Levis is still really raw, so I don't think he's ready to go. Same with Anthony Richardson.
yep,
So I think the most complete player right now is probably Stroud. And
yeah,
I think the Panthers see that, and I think they're enticed to go with Stroud at number one. But that doesn't necessarily mean much because we know how often NFL teams are willing to change their mind about a quarterback. And I just wanted to touch on one quick thing here. Mike Tannenbaum, Griffin Crest wrote a story about this on our website. Uh, Mike Tannenbaum may have made the worst mock draft of all time. It was really, really bad. So, what did you think about that one? I don't know. I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at it yet. But what did you think about Tannenbaum's mock?
yeah. I took a look at it, and I read a Chris article, and it's funny because it's so bad because he had Levis going fourth overall to the Colts, and that one, it's funny because it's so bad that it actually might be true because I could see the Colts being that kind of team where, I mean, you've seen their history of quarterbacks. So I could totally see them going after a guy like Levis who, isn't really complete, but yet they've had such a long history of veteran quarterbacks. They just want to say, "Oh, we have a young guy finally, trying to turn that tide." But I know he had Hooker going 5th overall, and you know that was, I don't know. I,
Awful. Hendon Hooker.
even before
Hendon
his
Hooker
injury,
is
he was not.
yeah.
Yeah, even before he's injured, he was not a first round overall. He was not a first round player.
And then he did get injured. So we're talking
Yeah.
about a guy that's coming off of an ACL tear in November, and he just got hurt. And we're saying he's going to go number 5, Mike. I mean, number 5, and that he's getting picked before Anthony Richardson,
Mm-hmm.
and he's 25 years old, by the way. Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
He's already an older player. So it was just pretty shocking to see that. He had Richardson going 11. And then he had Quentin Johnston all the way at 12, which Johnston might climb the boards a little bit, but he was
Mm-hmm.
projected to be a guy in the 20s.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of an ugly mock draft, up and down.
There's a reason why he's a former GM.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was just
Former, exactly. And
yeah.
one pick that perplexed me, and even in this mock, was Devin Witherspoon going to the Steelers. Because Joey Porter Jr. I think is it might be the biggest lock to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers in this draft that anybody has seen. The Steelers love to pick a guy like Porter. I mean, his father was on the Steelers. There's blood there. Right. They need a cornerback. They need a cornerback one, and Porter had an amazing season. To think that they would pass on Porter to take Witherspoon would be something that I just wouldn't expect. So talking a little bit more about the draft, our last topic of the day, last question I wanted to ask you. Who is one sleeper pick that you think is going to make a huge impact on the league? And I'll start out with this one a little bit. And by sleeper pick, I just mean guys that probably aren't going to go in the top 5. A guy that a lot of people aren't really necessarily talking about a whole lot. And I've got Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think that he's going to be an incredibly good wide receiver for some team. I just see Chris Olave in him. They're very similar players, especially because, the Ohio State background. Brian Hartline makes him really great at Ohio State. And Ohio State has produced NFL receivers each of these last couple of years. I know Smith and Jigba didn't really play last year a whole lot because he had a nagging hamstring for the entire year. But I think that was more precaution because you don't want to ruin a guy like Smith and Jigba's career by sticking him out in his senior year just so that he can continue to get hurt. You want to make him healthier. So I think he snuck around, and I think he was really quiet last year because he didn't play a whole lot. And I think he's going to shock everybody when he comes into the league. He's not going to be a guy like Jamar Chase where he doesn't play his senior year and then gets drafted number 5 overall. That's just not going to happen. But I think that Jamar Chase Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be a really good player in this league.
Yeah, he's going to be one of those, that kind of, I could see someone like the Chargers, like he's going to be that good, middle first round guy who a lot of teams would like to have early on, but they know, they kind of don't want to reach for it. But like you said, he's just, I could see the Olave comparison too. It's just, he's one of those guys where he's kind of been on top of the draft boards. But same thing. It's just, he's going to be that middle of the pack guy who, a team, even for a first round pick, it'll kind of be a steal for them. The guy I was looking a little bit into it. He's not going to go first round. He'll be more of probably honestly, I think a 3rd or 4th. So it goes deep. But he's the linebacker from Wisconsin, Nick Herbig. Just watching, because I watched a little bit of his film, I just see so much TJ Watt in him. He's just, and I mean, he's not the biggest guy, but when you see him go on the line and rush, he just high motor, he goes in there, he's hard, he's tough. He had, I think, 11 or 12 sacks last season. And even if you throw him in coverage, he goes out there, he deflects balls. He's really good in coverage. He's really good in the pass rush. So I think, a team that needs a linebacker, you steal him in the 3rd or 4th round. I see a lot of TJ Watt in him.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of this prospect actually from Wisconsin. I haven't really done my deep dive that I usually do on prospects just yet. So hopefully I'll get to him. Can you remind me his name one more time?
Nick Herbig.
Nick Herbig. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
I watched them because a lot of Saturdays I'll watch, college football games. It's just kind of, it's always on. So I'm like, and I'm intrigued in it. So, but a lot of time the Wisconsin games I'd see, they just always be on, and I would see him a couple times, and so his name kind of stuck out to me a little bit. And then I'm going through the draft stuff, and I see, oh, um, he's another, like, some people think he's a kind of an underrated, or under the radar kind of guy. So I looked more into him, watched some film stats, and he seems like he's that sleeper guy who a team will get a steal from.
Yeah, anytime that a player can really make a high impact in the Big Ten in the pass rush is really, a good sign,
Mm-hmm.
because the Big Ten is littered with really, really good offensive linemen. I
Yep.
think aside from the SEC, the Big Ten has the best offensive linemen as a conference in the entire sport. So anytime, you can go out there and be playing those Big Ten teams every week and really get to the quarterback a lot, it's more of a reflection on you more than it is your program. And hey, if you can get back into coverage, if you can have 11, 12 sacks and get back into coverage and deflect passes, NFL teams are going to look at you and you'll be a pretty strong candidate to get drafted decently early in the draft. So, but yeah, that's all I have for today. It's all we have. We talked a good amount about MLB. We're really intrigued about this season. It's going to be a really fun one, I think. Baseball's got a ton of momentum. There all these seats were packed, jam packed, and even in stadiums that don't get a lot of grasp, with attendance. We saw the Reds have an awesome pregame party, and then they went and they played their game, and there were minimal empty seats. So that's exciting to see. And then you got a team like the Miami Marlins where there's nobody there ever. And trust me, I've been to Lone Depot Park a couple times. I live in South Florida now, and I've gone to Lone Depot a couple times, and that place is always empty, or it's filled with Mets fans because it's always filled with Mets fans. And we did a nice job yesterday at packing out these stadiums across the sport. Lone Depot Park was filled with Miami Marlins fans and New York Mets fans. So it was pretty cool to see around the league. Some attendance going up. The World Baseball Classic certainly helped out with that.
Oh yeah, that the World Baseball Classic, that I think, and I mean it obviously hasn't been around too long, but that by far has been the best one that the league has produced. I mean, especially just with the whole storylines, Ohtani and Trout and just all these guys, and like we saw, Larry Nootbaar from the Cardinals. He wasn't. That was the whole story of he had a certain amount of followers on Instagram and Twitter, and then it skyrocketed to like 9 million or so, and so it helps a lot. It gets that culture going around, because that's what MLB is. It's culture, it's diverse, and it's just, you can tell it draws more people in seeing that World Baseball Classic, so they want to go to the actual MLB games to see those players.
Oh, it's so good for the sport. And like we said, this had to be the best World Baseball Classic that was ever played, not just because of the content on the field, but really what it drove. Like MLB Twitter and all these people and everybody watching was really, really into it this year, versus years in the past, people may have not been really all that into it. In 2013, we didn't see much at all. Obviously, it was we were still younger, and we didn't see much at all about that tournament. Then 2017, we saw a decent uptick. It was looking pretty good. I'll always remember that Adam Jones robbery of Manny Machado in the World Baseball Classic semifinal game.
Yep.
That was a great play, and a play that really electrified and made me think, hey, man, it's the World Baseball Classic. Is this thing really that awesome? Or are we here to stay? And then this year was really just different entirely, just because of the culture around the tournament and, the Ohtani Trout. I wonder if those guys could ever be on the same team together. That team would just be amazing if they were able to get together. Obviously, that's a joke right now. But yeah, the Classic is awesome every year, every fourth year, and it got robbed from us in 2020. But 2027, 2026, whenever it's next, is going to be a cool one.
But yeah, so yeah, it's really good for the sport, especially for base MLB, where they're not too great at marketing their players and everything. It was a really good step in the right direction for that.
Absolutely. And if you don't have anything more, I think we're cool to end the broadcast. We've got an hour and 10 minutes of footage today. Dom, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.